Kia ora. Te mana whenua o tēnei rohe, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. E ka mana, e ka reo, e ka hau e whā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I declare this meeting of the Community Services Committee open on Tuesday, May 9th, 2023. Before in Te Reo Māori, I greeted life. I acknowledge the mana whenua nations of Kaitahu, Katimamoe, Waitaha, Hawea and Rabuwai, in whose ancestral territory we are so each fortunate to live, work, love, learn and play. And also in Te Reo Māori, I greeted all the authorities present, ka mana, all the voices, ka reo, and all of us from ka hau e whā, the four directions. So I extend greetings and acknowledgements to members of the public present and who may be watching us on live stream. I greet and acknowledge members of the media, CEO Graham and her executive leadership team and all her staff, and of course colleagues seated around the table. And before I invite representatives of the professional theatre community to come and speak at Public Forum to the table, I'll offer karakia timataka, an incantation to call on the universal energy, vitality, te mauri ora, to infuse and enrich us all in this meeting, this time together. Tu tawa mai ruka, tu tawa mai raro, tu tawa mai roto, tu tawa mai I waho. Kia tau te mauri, I te mauri tū, te mauri ora ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Kia ora. Welcome, Ms. Elliott, Mr. Roberts and Mr. Hayden. Colleagues, you'll have before you a presentation or a written piece of information, and you may recall you received an email during the hearings week. Thank you for your time and energy and your commitment to your mahi and service to our community at large. The next 5 minutes are yours.
Honourable Mayor and Councillors, thank you for your time. Ko Māori Roberts aho. I'm a lighting designer, director, and I teach theatre technology and performance design at the University of Otago.
Kia ora. Ko Peter Hayden tōku ingoa. I am a documentary film producer and actor.
Kia ora. Ko Karen Elliott tōku ingoa. For the Stage South Board, I'm a theatre practitioner. As you know from our April 20 email, we're excited by a performing arts centre which opened on the Kapiti Coast in 2020, costing $12 million.
To give my impressions and to orientate you, in 2021, I was part of a tour of Aotearoa with NZSO production of Stravinsky's The Soldier's Tale, and we performed in Tarakau, Kapiti. So, to familiarise, the main stage, that was familiar. It was rather like the Fortune, 300 plus seats, but that's where the comparisons finish. It was huge. The stage was 12 metres by 10 metres. It had a fly tower above, and it had an orchestra pit below. The acoustics had been designed for both acoustic and for amplified sound. The seating was gently sloping and comfortable. The air conditioning was agreeable and silent. Out in the atrium, which was 3/4 the size of the art gallery atrium down here, on the other side from the main theatre was the Sir John Trimmer Theatre, 200 square metres, 200 seating, sprung floor, a very versatile space for all kinds of things. Back in the atrium, the gallery above, the mezzanine gallery, the rooms off it, there was a variety of size spaces for a rehearsal rooms, for band rooms, for meeting rooms, and a recording studio. I was really impressed by the design, by the comfort, and by the passion the people of this community had for their performing arts centre. As part of this tour, we visited a number of performing arts centres, including ones in Upper Hutt, in Carterton, and in Ashburton. They were all impressive, but this one was a real standout.
For $12 million, that's an amazing achievement, and we wanted to alert Council to this possibility, this reality. You're appropriately cautious with expensive projects as you're spending ratepayers' dollars, but here is a tangible example of a completed performing arts centre for much less than already discussed. Te Raukura is allied with Kapiti College, whose principal we've talked with. He spent a sabbatical looking at facilities in Australia, the US and the UK before starting design work, and is keen to share things he learned from the build. We also have valuable information from the manager on how the centre actually works. We think the possibility of building a similar centre is worth very serious consideration. We plan to visit it and talk further with those involved, and perhaps a councillor or two might like to join us. Our request is that you set aside any further considerations regarding theatres in Dunedin until we can provide you with a better idea of how Te Raukura came about and how something like it could be an appropriate solution for our city.
I'd like to advocate for the merits of considering a new build in Dunedin. The following: a new build offers an opportunity to get the space you need without compromise. You don't want to squeeze into a 19th century space when you have a 21st century problem. You can provide for accessibility from the start, providing for our disabled audiences, performers and backstage crew is paramount. New build can and should be at street level for access for loading in and out of the building easily. Appropriate hosting spaces, atriums, so that you can provide for community groups, audiences, mana whenua and Pacifica audiences who need the kind of generous spaces to manaaki people into the building, and to also provide function space. 21st century technology can be built into the fabric of the building and not kind of added in on top of. Car parking? Well, maybe. Practice spaces, offices, storage, so that you can, did I finish? Yeah. Two more things. Retrofitting spaces can be expensive, and we know that once you start removing things from a building, you begin to uncover certain things. So we need to know what's involved. So that will be my take.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you so much. Questions, colleagues? Councillor Ackland, followed by Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you just go over again, please, the performance spaces, so how many there are and what capacity they have audience-wise?
Certainly, the main stage, 300 plus, and that is gently raked. That was a proper theatre with a fly tower. The other one is they call a black box, 200 metre square. It can hold up to 200 people and orientate the seating in whichever way you want, and it's got a sprung floor. Both stages have sprung floors.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your presentation. Who funded this build? Did you tell us and I missed it because I was late, or?
So the my understanding about the build in Kapiti was that because it's attached to a college, this particular one was attached to a college, the local council put in a foundation amount, and then the rest was raised within the community. So it is a real community-focused building. Yeah.
And presumably the ministry also made a contribution. Thank you. And you are going to provide us with a breakdown of how that funding flowed in due course.
Sorry, I pressed my button while you were talking.
You're going to provide us, post your visit, you're going to provide us with the detail of how the different amounts of funding actually flowed.
We do have some information on that, but yes, all of the aspects of the build.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker, followed by Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Marty, Peter and Karen for coming for us today. I presume, I'm right in assuming that 2020, 12 million in 2023/4 would not obviously be comparable now.
Well, this is the crux of the issue here. We are throwing prices around with whatever we're trying to do, but we need to now go to the next stage and go, what is actually on the table here? No matter what, until we get actual pricing on the table, we're just speculating. So yes, you're right, 2020, 12 million, it will be very different now, but we don't know until we actually discover and find out.
That segues into my next question, Marty. So from what I was hearing, your request here today is for us to set aside, I think, your considerations until you've done some work on this. So the question aligned to that is, have you spoken to the group who are proposing the Mayfair Athenaeum?
We've been part of that group. As professional theatre practitioners, we've been part of that group right from the start. And we have been to workshops, we have submitted stuff to them, and they know about this. Basically, we're all trying to work together to find a solution to this theatre problem that we've got in Dunedin. So there are certain things that professional theatres need that amateur theatres don't need. It's rather like the difference between the Highlanders' needs and the Southern Rugby Club's needs. So what we're doing is we're trying to find not exactly a compromise, but working together to come up with as many solutions as we can to present to the council.
Okay, thank you. Whoops. Button pressing competition. And by the way, Southern Rugby could probably beat the Highlanders at the moment. So, Peter, you listed a bunch of things, I think, with things like breakout rooms, orchestra pits, blah, blah, blah. Is that one of the concerns if we were to progress, say, for example, the Athenaeum, there might be a possibility that everything that is needed might not be included? Is that what, am I right in thinking that, or not?
Yes, you are. I mean, I know something of the Athenaeum build, but this is a generous space. It's got the magic number of seats. It's the 350, even pushing to 400. And this is what we're finding all over Aotearoa, all over the world. That second level, down from the Opera House, down. And if you visit the Te Raukura Kakapiti website, you will see the shows that have been on for the last 2 years. I was gobsmacked. Half of them we'd never seen in Dunedin. And they are touring shows which they can accommodate and which fit the space perfectly.
And finally, Councillor Gilbert's question.
Thank you, and thank you very much for coming in. And Mr. Hayden, I have to confess, every time I listen to your voice, and I'm learning something, because as a teen, I learnt more about wildlife listening to your voice than I did anywhere else. I have to also confess then, can somebody please teach me, as a child that I am, sprung floors, what is the benefit of sprung floors?
So a sprung floor is when you have dance or kapahaka, you've got to have a floor that is sprung to take the impact of the dancer's feet. If you don't have a sprung floor, you will damage people's feet and legs.
And so much theatre today involves clowning, acrobatics. It's not just people standing in a drawing room kind of spouting off to each other. It's three-dimensional and very physical.
No longer the bit soft, what light and all that sort of stuff. Roger. I've just been looking at their website, and further to Councillor Benson Pope's questions, I noticed that it was a 12 million project with most of the fundraising being done by Kapiti College, and the classrooms were funded by the Ministry of Education, with the Kapiti Coast District Council contributing 1.6 million as a community share. So that begs the question, have you, and I know I'm going over old ground here, have you contacted the ministry? Is there any indication by them that they would consider at the very least a similar model to this?
We're not actually talking about sharing this with the ministry. The schools, that we are really lucky here in Dunedin that the secondary schools in Dunedin already have really good performing arts centres. So what we're looking at is a centre which adapts some of those spaces. For example, we would not be looking at 9 to 11 practice rooms. They are there specifically for teaching purposes for Kapiti College. All we're doing is bringing this to you as an example of something that can be done, where I know, having been a member of the group studying working on the feasibility study, that the costs of the initial Performing Arts Centre in Dunedin were just astronomical. And all we're doing is bringing this as an example of something that can be done more cheaply. It may not be able to be done for 12 million, obviously, but it mightn't cost 20 million. Who knows? We need to study it more. The other thing, I guess, that I would say about a fly tower, etc., is that takes into account the needs of opera, for example. So what we're trying to do is set up something that answers the needs for everybody, not just a touring show with 6 performers, but something that needs stuff flown and all of that stuff, sprung floor for dance, everything contained within that one building.
Thank you, and I've got 2 more questions. Is that okay? Lovely. You're talking about it being a hub. But you're also saying that other areas have good services and good venues and things themselves. So I'm curious as to what catchment area, for want of a better expression, this would be wanting to service. If we're not servicing a school like Kapiti College is, what are we servicing? Is it, and I use it in inverted commas, just Dunedin, or are we looking at further afield, and therefore are the sizes that we were talking about, the 200 and 300, I think it was, wasn't it? Is that going to be enough?
I think it's a good question, and I think you think of it in terms of a regional hub, but also a theatre is not just a venue, it's the people inside it who are working within it. So, with a theatre comes technical staff, creative designers, directors, performers, who may use that space on a regular basis within our community, but from without as well. And you become part of a network that then becomes a touchstone of bringing work into the city, but also generating work from within the city. At the moment, we're struggling with that. We are kind of not able to do that. Yeah.
So I even see sort of a greater thing going on to more of an education thing and tying in with the film industry and stuff. Lovely. My last question is around, again, Mr. Hayden, you mentioned about it being set up to do the design of the acoustics was set up for both acoustic as well as electric music. And I'm curious as to what classification that is. I mean, there's a big difference between having 2 cellos in there and a full, the acoustic people are very smart people. They have to face this challenge a lot, where you've got
spaces being used for a variety of purposes. It's not just the old concert chamber 2 by 1 by 1 anymore. It's kind of a lot of different kind of spaces, which with appropriate use of panels, and I don't know how they do it, but I'm assured that we were acoustic because NZSO never uses a microphone, so we had to be heard at the back, and that was absolutely fine. But with amplified sound, you've got to be able to make it so it just doesn't become unbearable for people, and they've achieved that, according to them. I haven't been to an amplified show there, but it was they needed to be able to accommodate both. So I would hope that the team will talk to the designer, the acoustic designers who are from the Kapiti Coast, as I understand, when they're up there.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you so much for your commitment and your energy and your mahi and kia kaha. And thank you for bringing this take to us. Okay, there are no apologies, so we're moving on to item 4, confirmation of the agenda. Are there any additions, alterations, or deletions to the agenda? Okay, thank you. I'm happy to move that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mayhem. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Abstentions? Declare the motion is carried. Kia ora. Page 5, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arises between their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interests they might have. Are there any updates to the register of interest?
Yes, Madam Chair, and it will be on the next register of interest. I'm now the Chair of Study Dunedin.
Okay, kia ora. So I move that the committee amends the elected members' interest register and amends the proposed management plan for elected members' interest. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ackland. I'm just going to put it. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? Thank you. I declare the motion is carried. Confirmation of minutes. I am very happy to move that the committee confirms the minutes of the Community Services meeting held on 6th of March 2023 as a correct record. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Abstentions? I declare the motion is carried. Kia ora, and now we are on Part A, reports. Community Services Committee Forward Work Programme. That's item 7, and Mr. Simon Pickford will answer questions in relation to the Forward Work Programme. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question around the performing arts venue and how that work is going. On the 15th of February 2022, we had a report about the performing arts venue, and the next steps included the establishment of a performing arts roundtable group and the development of a councillor workshop that includes key representatives from the performing arts community and ongoing update reports. And I can't find any information on those, and I was wondering where the performing arts venue update stands at the moment.
So, just casting my mind back, that work, some of that work got pulled into what's currently in the Forward Work Programme around the work that we were doing with the community was to work on this. You know, one of the options that came through with the work that we have been doing with the community was the Dunedin Theatre Network. The Dunedin Theatre Network then came, as it's set out there, to annual plan last year, and then staff were asked to work alongside this group to collaborate and come up with ways to support this group in their funding. So that's what's come through in this recent annual plan. we have continued to meet widely with the community. The Theatre Network group that we were wanting to set up into a round table wanted to do their own group, which is what's happened. So the group itself didn't really want council to lead that process. They wanted to lead it for themselves. And what's come out of that is the report that came to the annual plan last week or the week before. And so I guess, you know, the group itself, bringing the group together has been a really useful thing because they were a fractured community, and what we did was to try and bring them together around that roundtable process. They then wanted to manage themselves, and that's what's happened. And so I guess they have morphed and taken control themselves to create more of a community-led process for themselves, which has come through in the annual plan process.
So what's the name of that group? Is that the Dunedin Theatre Network with the 3 theatres that came to us? Do they represent all of the performing arts sector?
They have workshopped and communicated widely, we just heard that then, with all of the community that we started to bring together. They then ran their own meetings and ran their own workshops. Staff weren't necessarily required to be part of that. They wanted it to be community-led. And we have stayed and met with them monthly as they have worked through, you know, their process as a community. We have continued to support them around, you know, what they presented to council. Yeah, it has changed, but that has been community driven.
Kia ora. Councillor Lucas, followed by Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I have now another question to follow on from Deputy Mayor Barker, if I may. So in terms of the presentation that we just heard and in light of the comments we've heard, so is there any expected timeframes as far as for council in terms of the performing arts venue?
So I think in terms of expected timeframes, I guess there will be at deliberations some opportunity for you to think and deliberate on a way forward with the options that you have in front of you. There is, and now you've heard from another group who are also part of that same Theatre Network group. They also submitted as part of that submission. If you go back into that report, their submission is in there in support of that submission. So, you know, you've got a full community submission to you, leading you in slightly different places. Both of them actually all stem from the same group.
If I can just add to that, as part of the documents you can expect for deliberations, because you did have that substantial submission on the Theatre Network and this work, it'll either be a separate report, but more likely in the Chief Executive's overarching report, there'll be a section specifically outlining options for councillors in this space and looking at what next steps might be, alongside the staff comment on the various theatre submissions that were received. Oh, sorry, I got the timing wrong.
Thank you. It's on another topic, but probably a similar answer in terms of the live music action plan, when it says community engagement this month, and in light of the number of submissions that are in the annual plan in relation to that, I'm just wondering the community engagement, how that is going to play out this month.
So we've been engaging with the community the whole way through. The community engagement, and more recently, staff met with the Live Dunedin Music Venues Group, Save Dunedin Live Venues Group, and they know exactly where things are at with the report coming to council. They want an opportunity to also, at the same time as we'll be giving workshops, to also see what the draft is and to have that final feedback into the work. Like I said, they've been seeing the work the whole time. They've helped write it, they've helped build it, they've helped develop the list that is the framework for the action plan, and they just want to make sure that the voice that they've had and the input that they have had from the start is also still there in the final document. The document has been brought back in-house to kind of finalise, so they want to see, you know, where things are at. So that is part of the engagement. Depending on how that goes, we've got we've got a workshop period over June, July, and this you'll have the opportunity as council to have the same input into the draft, depending on what that input looks like from both the community and council will depend on our timeframes here. If it's relatively straightforward, then the report could come, you know, to council meeting in that period. If it actually requires a bit of reworking or you want to have more input into it, or the community does, then we've got a little bit of time there with the ultimate, you know, the next community services meeting is not until August. This is the last one until August, so it could come back here in August, or it could come back to council in June or July, depending on the workshop.
Kia ora. Mr Mayor, followed by Councillor Walker and then Councillor Houlihan.
Yeah, Councillor Lucas pretty much asked my question, but more specifically, we've got 3 weeks left in May, and for May, it's May is Community Engagement Month. Will there be any further community engagement with the live music action plan and the community at large over the next 3 weeks left in May?
Yes, as I mentioned, we have been engaging with the community the whole time. So we're always talking with that community, and we have had and continue to have regular meetings.
What specific things will there be in the remaining 3 weeks of May?
It depends on what they want to share with us. So we'll have our normal meetings and we'll share with them where we're at. They'll give us feedback that will go back into the work, and that's the ongoing process that we have been involved in with the community.
So how regular are the normal meetings?
They had been monthly up until the end of February. Then, like I said, we brought the work in-house to get, you know, to actually develop something up. And then the last meeting was in April. There'll be another one in May. We've been meeting regularly.
So there'll be one more meeting in May sometime. Is that what you're saying?
There'll be another meeting in May, depending on what the outcome of that meeting is. There may be more. There may just be one. It really is dependent on the group.
I was just trying to establish if there was one scheduled, so it sounds like there is. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Lucas has stolen all of her thunder, but it was a great question. But I'll ask the question again just for surety and clarity and assurance for all of us, actually. So once we have had the workshops in June, July, around the live music action plan, there will thereafter be an opportunity for the Save Dunedin group to feed back into anything that comes out of that that's not clear, and then it'll recycle back to us. So I'm just getting surety that there'll be further opportunity post-workshop for that group to feed back into it.
Yes, so what's in the forward work program is an iterative process. I could either put the workshops first and the community second, or the community first or the workshop second. It's got to go through a bit of an iterative process, and we can't be sure because I don't know what you're going to say and I don't know what the community is going to say. So I'm starting with the community first, as we have been going and back and forwards over this entire period. They'll have input into what staff have done. Then we'll come into the workshop process. It'll be a relatively short time after we've talked, we've worked with the community. We'll come back into a council workshop process. You'll have some input. If there are significant changes where we need to go back to the community, that will need to happen again. And, we'll just have to work out how we finalise the document around those processes, which is why there is that period of time that's been put into the forward work program. It will be a bit of an iterative process, and I won't be clear about it until I receive your feedback.
Councillor Houlihan.
So following on from that, the once the document is done, and have some of the members seen a draft of that, of the same?
Sorry. They have not seen the draft. They have not seen the draft since February, but it has filled out since then.
The draft they initially saw, what is now, will be quite different, will it?
Yes, it will.
With regards to the theatre, my understanding is initially last term we made a vote and put money aside for a professional theatre. My understanding was that that was to fill the gap because we haven't got the Fortune Theatre anymore, and we've got an issue in the city that our professional theatre practitioners are leaving because they haven't got a strong network here. Is that not the case? Or is that the case? That was my understanding.
So council put an amount of money in the budget, and sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, about $17 million, give or take. That money is still in the budget. And the work that is being done is to inform how council will spend the budget if that's what they decide to do.
But just to clarify, because it's very, very different, like a theatre for professional practitioners and one, because we've got two proposals, with the people today who presented, and we've got the obviously the theatre network. The theatre network, just to clear, or whatever, I'm not sure what they're exactly calling themselves, their exact name, but the group that are looking at the 3 community theatres. Now, just to clarify, that's 99% amateur theatre access. Those theatres are mainly used for amateur theatre. Was that our purpose, or was that motion, my understanding was, for a professional theatre?
So, Councillor, what I would say is we have been working with the theatre community, both the professional and community-based theatre community, to look at how we can deliver a venue for them that meets their needs or otherwise. And as I said, I think in response to Councillor Lucas, in my covering report, we'll bring back where we're up to with that work for council to consider as part of the deliberations. So there have been no decisions made to build anything yet in any form. We're still working through with the community. And that includes professional and non-professional.
Are there any more questions? Thank you. I'm very happy to move that the committee notes the Community Services Committee Forward Work Programme. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mayhem. Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Okay. There being no speakers, I'm just going to put the... Oh. Okay. All right. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I just want to speak to, as I realise it's the forward working program, and part of that are 2 major issues for our city in the arts sector is obviously the live music and the theatre. And I'm very grateful that we had some professional theatre practitioners come and speak to us today. This is what I've been waiting for, to be honest. We have... and I'm getting feedback regularly on it, we have quite a major problem in our city with the fact that the Fortune Theatre was closed down a while ago for many different reasons. And last term we voted to put some money aside, not a little amount either, 17 million is a decent amount of money, for a replacement theatre. My understanding was that that money was put aside to have a professional theatre in our city. Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's great to be able to fix theatres that are currently existing and upkeep and all the rest of it. However, that won't necessarily fill a gap for professional theatre. And I think we need to be very aware of that, and also aware of the impact that's having on the industry, because we used to have creative professional actors, creative artistic directors and directors in our city. Now we don't, a lot of those people are leaving or going to seek work outside Dunedin because there just isn't the opportunities here anymore. And as you heard, like a lot of the touring acts as well aren't coming here either. I mean, some of them, if they're really big, can come to the Fortune. Not to the Fortune. They can't come to the Fortune. They could come to the Regent. But yeah, I just think we need to be aware of that before we make a decision, because at the moment we've got a group that have come along and they've got, certainly they've done a lot of work with their process and everything. I can't get involved in discussing that in detail, obviously, because we've all got to vote on it. But I think we need to think about what we're actually voting for at the end of it and what the purpose of the theatre is, because otherwise, we could end up without a professional theatre in our city, and that's the gap I believe we're trying to fill.
Are there any other speakers? I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. I declare the motion is carried. And now we move to item 8, Freedom Camping 2022/2023, end of season report. Thank you, Mr. McLean and Mr. Hogg, for your mahi. Are there any prefacing comments you would like to offer?
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. No, we're happy to take questions.
Kia ora, Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McLean and Mr. Hogan. Can I just note that during the annual plan hearings, I noted many of the submitters referred to the Parks and Rec team and how good they were to deal with. So something to take back to your team. I was particularly interested in this report, and as you probably know, I've always had a view that education is the way to go rather than the punitive approach in terms of freedom camping. Can you speak to the approach as it's evolved, as you see it evolving over the coming year or two?
Yes, so I think that the educative approach really came in strongly with the implementation of the Community Ranger Initiative in 2018. That gave us people on the ground who were able to interact with campers and provide bylaw information, also information beyond the bylaw as to what Dunedin had to offer. And I think we started to see quite significant changes and compliance improvements from that point. The Community Ranger program has developed over that time. We've shaped the messaging as we've encountered issues as they've emerged. And looking forward, I think with the bill before Parliament at the moment, the self-contained vehicles legislation, motor vehicles legislation bill, there'll be a role there for the community rangers in promoting the changes that bill brings in.
And my second question is around the fines. Can you just remind me in this bill, because one of the issues is this fines that don't get paid, and there has been calls for a long time to try and link those in with the likes of rental car companies and so forth so that they do get paid. Can you speak to that in terms of the bill and what that might achieve in that area? I just don't recall that detail.
The early versions of the bill included a change that would allow councils to pursue rental vehicle companies for the infringements that were issued to their customers. It's my understanding that the later versions of the bill have removed that, so that won't be a possibility.
And finally, can you just tell me what is your impression of the visitors, the sort of spread of visitors? We know that there are young people that come and visit, but there are others as well. What is your sense of that in this last season about the variety of people that come to our city using this way of travel?
I think the Community Ranger program gave us more insight into the type of visitors that were coming. I think early on we had a perception of what a freedom camper was, and that may have been inaccurate. And I think through things like the Freedom Camper survey, we had a bit more insight into the type of people that were using our sites. So they might include parents coming down to visit their children at university, seasonal workers, a whole range of folks. And so I think that was surprising to us at the time that there was such a spread of different people.
Thank you for your mahi.
Kia ora, Councillor Benton-Pope, followed by Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to move in due course when we're finished with questions if you want. I'm delighted to see the trend that you've established, but I was concerned that a reduction in the nightly patrolling might actually not be effective because of the churn in the industry. But I'm reassured. I'm getting to the question. I'm reassured, therefore, with the comments you make in paragraph 36 about the continuation of the community ranger process at the same level to educate people about what's expected. Are you confident that that will be enough to maintain or continue to improve the compliance trend?
Kapoi, Councillor, and if I may, through the chair. Yeah, look, right from the outset, we've actually had really high compliance in the high 90s. So we're confident that our approach is working. But what we do with it at the end of every season is we review how it's going and we tailor the next season. Obviously, we've had some interruptions with COVID, so we've had to sort of cut our cloth to fit that. So we're confident that the approach will work, but we'll review it. And we remain agile enough with our enforcement to respond to complaints. So it's just the scheduled nightly patrols that we're reducing.
Does that agility include the ability to re-increase the nightly patrol should that be deemed necessary? Or do you not have funding to be that agile?
We would respond if we needed to, and we'd look for efficiencies elsewhere across our security services throughout the whole activity.
Kia ora, Councillor Gilbert, and then Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Right, first up, I'm assuming to the Rangers thing, because it's on point number 33, the year-to-date Freedom Camping enforcement costs to the 31st of March, presuming that is a 9-month total. That would be my first question by nod. Is that a 9-month?
Kia ora, Councillor. Yes, there'll be a final April cost. At the time of writing the report, we were just shy of calculating the April costs.
Lovely, but for the financial year, we're talking 9-month. That's the 9-month cost. So extrapolating that out, it takes it to let's call it 165,000 for over 12 months. How is that broken down? Is that solely on wage cost, or is there also vehicle cost? Is there what goes into that?
Thanks, through the chair. So our security runs on that. So we pay, obviously being living wage accredited, we pay staff that are working on our contracts living wage, and they factor in vehicles. Some of the sites that we visit are remote, which is right down the end of the Otago Peninsula, out to Warrington, Brighton, that. So vehicle costs and staff time are counted in that.
If I could just,
well, sorry, go for it.
Sorry, if I could just add to that, the vast bulk of the costs are incurred between that period of nightly patrols between November and April.
Thank you. Also, and I know you have covered this, I just want to clarify your comment about the earlier version of the bill having a way to be able to go back to the rental car companies and it currently doesn't. Now, as I understand it, speaking for a friend, somebody who may possibly have got a speeding ticket overseas and that speeding ticket follows them, home perhaps, what was the logic? Was there logic given as to why that was removed?
There wasn't that level of detail in the version of the bill that I saw. Some of it was redacted, I believe. Since the bill is still before the parliamentary process, I'm not sure exactly what the final document will have.
Right, and my last question is on point 31, which was around how the infringement notices were divvied up. The 103 notices for staying in restricted areas, etc. But the one that caught my attention was now I've lost. Oh, there we go. mostly issued to campers who stayed more than the permitted 2 consecutive nights. Now, rather than issuing fines to those who actually want to stay for a longer period in our city, was a more welcoming approach ever considered or trialled?
The 2-night maximum limit is contained within the bylaw at the moment, and we've made commitments in the past to enforce the bylaw as it's been. That increase in that number of notices for staying more than 2 consecutive nights is an increase in that particular infringement, and that is something that we have noticed. I think in more recent years we've seen a spectrum of campers, from the majority which are recreational freedom campers through to more long-term campers. That might include people who are freedom camping as a lifestyle choice, people who might be homeless in the short term. That could include students between flats over the summer, things like that, right through to people who have been homeless in the long term. So there's quite a spread of people there, and I think that area, that proportion has been deepening a little bit in the last few years. So it's something that we're conscious of and we're working toward. That's my interpretation of those numbers there.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, followed by Deputy Mayor Barker, and then Councillor Houlihan, and then Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr Hogg and Mr McLean, and thank you, Mr Hogg, for pointing out and reminding us that there's a vast array of people who freedom camp. My question's around number 37, the legislation, and the now departed Mr Nash's self-contained motor vehicles legislation bill, and I think you've got the date wrong there. It's 2023 August, but that's in the future. It should be 2022. Have we, and I should know this, I guess, have we submitted to that bill, or will we get a chance to submit to that bill, or was it one that came and we decided not to?
Council did submit on that bill, I believe, last year. We were generally quite supportive of the proposed changes. We did express some concern in the proposal to insist that all certified self-contained vehicles had a fixed plumb toilet, as we were concerned how that might affect demand for our unrestricted freedom camping sites.
Thank you, Chair. I just have some questions around the Community Ranger program. I understand previously, did the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, I see that they gave $54,000 towards funding the 2022-23 Community Ranger program. Are they going to be putting any money towards the 23-24 Community Ranger program?
We haven't heard anything from the Ministry on that at this stage. If we do, it would likely be a little bit closer to the start of the next peak season. They have provided over a number of years, and I think there's been a call from councils around the country to provide extra resource in the event that the bill comes through Parliament, and it's expected there'll be resource needed to promote those changes.
So I see that it's sort of a joint venture between DOC and the DCC. So in the report it has that there's a cost of freedom camping enforcement, $123,000. But what's the cost of the Community Ranger program to the DCC?
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor. Through the Chair, it's approximately, the cost of the DCC is approximately $85,000, and that's for 3 rangers.
Thank you. I just wonder, do we keep an eye, I think there's portaloos at the Thomas Burns Park, is that correct?
Correct.
And where does the budget line for providing those sit?
I'd have to check on where the budget line sits, but it's the provision of portaloos and some of the rubbish bins during the freedom camping season is tagged to the freedom camping season itself, but we know that many of the manahiri to our freedom camping sites are actually not freedom campers, they're just reserve users, so they also use the facilities such as the portaloos or rubbish bins as well. So it's a little bit difficult to extrapolate the exact costs, but those things are tagged. We put them out at the beginning of the season and pull them in generally at the end. So, but if it pleases council, we could try our best at extrapolating those costs. Yeah.
And my final question is just around the engagement internal, where it says that you've engaged with the Customer Services Agency, Fleet Services, Communities and Marketing departments, and I just wonder, is there any engagement with the eyesight as a key provider of information to people?
Yes, apologies for leaving that off the list. We have regular contact with eyesight as they're one of our key distributors of Freedom Camping information.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan, followed by Councillor O'Malley and Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Do we measure demographics at all, like what sort of people are freedom camping and what? And I'm wondering if that demographic has changed since this new legislation has come out.
Councillor, that's in the report.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I'll have another look. So, are you concerned that the change in the fact that they're making them use self-contained toilets, and that it's a lot of people are saying it's going to cut off a lot of people using going freedom camping because of the cost? It's very prohibitive. Are we noticing that at all?
As that change hasn't been made as of yet, we haven't noticed anything on the ground. We expect that if that change does go through, that will affect a reasonable proportion, perhaps quite a high proportion of the vehicles that typically use freedom camping sites across Dunedin. How those vehicle owners react, given that installing a fixed toilet would be, as you said, quite cost prohibitive for many, we anticipate that we'll have increased demand at those unrestricted sites.
Councillor O'Malley and then Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First question is, it looks like the reduction in policing is you're justifying that because you're seeing actually an increase in compliance. Is that correct?
Yes, I think we're achieving a good trajectory with compliance there.
Did you, when you looked at the policing, did you look at where infringements are? In other words, are there some sites where people are always compliant, so there's no point in sending a car out to check because you'll almost find nobody, where there's other places where non-compliance is at a higher rate? Have you done any of that analysis to determine sort of where the patrols would go later?
We've noticed over the years that the issues, when they emerge, they don't always emerge in the same places. We've had areas that pop up and areas that quieten down. We have considered where we need, where we tend to have the most issues. I think in some regards we'd have to be careful that we didn't presume that the improvements were happening alongside enforcement, that they might be happening due to enforcement. So there would be a possible. We considered whether we might remove areas of the patrol as a way of reducing costs. I think the approach that we've gone with will provide good, consistent enforcement across the city over that period where we need it the most.
And we are talking at less than 1%, right, non-compliant. Yep, thanks. I just want to follow up with Councillor Gilbert's question. It is in the bylaw, the 2 days overnight. I can't really remember back then when that bylaw was written why that restriction of 2 days was put in place. Do you have any recall of that?
My recollections don't go back that far either, but I think from some of the feedback we get from residents and members in the community that there are some concerns and issues around sharing of spaces, and so I think the 2-night maximum limit there, I think what it does now is it redistributes campers across the city more, and it frees up sites. It means we don't have people living in them.
It seems really remarkable compliance. 99% achieved is fantastic. I'm curious how that compares to, do we have any data pre the era of compliance and prior to having ranges? Because, of course, we wouldn't have been measuring it so much. It might have been just based on complaints. But did we have a large number of complaints compared to the number of vehicles back then? And then, secondly, how does this compare to other areas, tourist destinations around New Zealand? Do any other jurisdictions keep data? Because I think this is a remarkable effort.
Thank you. We don't have very good data prior to 2017, not that level of data. I think at the time, around that time, we started to, we were dealing with quite significant issues, and so we looked at what changes could be made, what initiatives could be implemented, and decided that collecting as much data as we could alongside those would be beneficial in determining how effective they were. We do liaise quite frequently with members of other territorial authorities who are involved in freedom camper management. I don't have any specific numbers. I know that a lot of the time geography plays quite a role in compliance. Somewhere like Queenstown that has a very high level of freedom camper visitors and quite a small area can suffer quite significantly. Other areas struggle with enforcement because their TAs are quite spread out and they might have popular sites right out the limits of those. Some TAs have a shortage of freedom campers in some areas where they'd actually quite like them and a surplus in others, so it varies quite considerably across those areas.
Thank you. Campermate and other apps like that, through the last 5 or 6 years, they seem to have made quite an influence in how people were visiting the areas and locations. Are you seeing that sort of being in partnership with the, I'd say, greater engagement of compliance?
Yes, I think that access to information generally has been a key component to the way that bylaw compliance has improved in Dunedin and at a national level as well. The freedom camping apps, including Campermate, have certainly been an important part of that. I think our survey respondents, around 80%, had found that site through Campermate and were given access to the rules that applied at that site. I would suggest that there are also apps that would work to circumvent the bylaw. So it does work both ways, but certainly an important tool, a tool that's improved over the years as well.
And I from my experience in watching freedom camping evolve over the last 10 years, I look at when I see the Warrington Domain and Ocean View Reserve, the community boards have played quite an important role in those areas, and both those two communities. Are they still active and supporting the freedom camping? And what I mean by that is essentially at times, and the local residents taking it upon themselves to assist and even provide information to people using those areas, so there is that level of compliance.
In response to the latter part of your question, yes, there are residents that have taken an active role in monitoring and providing advice to campers as well. The community boards have definitely played a significant role, especially during those periods where we were seeing record numbers of freedom campers and struggling with certain issues. They have not experienced the level of issue in the last couple of years, primarily due to reduced visitor numbers through COVID. I think the implementation of the amendment of the bylaw to include Thomas Burns Street site as a third unrestricted site was one that was welcomed quite heavily by the community boards in those key areas, as it helped redistribute campers to a third location and reduce the load on those sites.
I believe we have no more questions, and I have had indications from Councillor Benson Pope and Councillor Gary that they wish to move the motion that the committee notes the Freedom Camping 2022/2023 end of season report, and Councillor Gary seconding. Do you wish to speak to your motion, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I think the council as a whole should be pleased and proud with what has been, as Councillor Wiley correctly identified, a process of evolution around how we manage the various styles of freedom camping. We all recall the temperature levels when there were issues in McHenry Bay in particular, both with use of local facilities and the overload that caused a lot of problem, not just there, but that was clearly one of the first issues that we had to deal with. And we have, as the pendulum has moved back and forwards, I think, ended up in a really good position. I think that's going to get better. I'll come to that in a moment, but I believe we, through our policy decisions and the aforementioned bylaw in its evolution, have struck a good position between the wish to be as welcoming as we would hope New Zealanders would be, to people from overseas doing exactly what many of us have done overseas, and also the encouragement of behaviour appropriate to our communities without obstructing community use of their own local facilities, halls, toilets, whatever, or parks. And I think the mix of the sites that we have has been very smart, but not just the range of physical locations and different types of site, but also the large decision to use the large site at Thomas Burn Street. And I think the balance of the two-night rule doesn't send them off anywhere. It might send them to a different place, and that's a bit like car parking downtown. That's to encourage churn and make spaces available and not have the same 20 people hogging up all the spaces for everyone. So I think it's a pat on our collective backs and a very big thank you to the staff who have been involved in getting us to a position that I think is a good one to be in. As far as the change that's coming, I think that will have consequences because the biggest problem has been the portaloo shoved under the seat that's never used because you have to charge to get it, you pay extra to get it cleaned, and that though entitling you to a self-containment sticker on your vehicle has always been a nonsense, and much and all is it will change the behaviour of rental companies and the cheap van renters. I think that's a change for the better. It will also make it a lot easier to ensure that, to encourage better behaviour around the community. So I think the government's finally evolving and getting a bit more responsible and sensible and pragmatic about this than it has been, and I think in many ways we have led the way. We certainly have, compared with some other local authorities around the country whose behaviour towards visitors has been less than desirable.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have come so far with freedom camping, and I well remember the issues at McHenry Bay. I lived them quite extensively for some time, but I have seen the change, and now we don't focus on what our freedom campers are eating. There was a time when people got very fixated on noodle eating. I never quite understood that. And the level of compliance is quite extraordinary as well. I've always believed that educating our visitors into what our rules are around looking after our environment and visiting our city is a much better way to go than being punitive. And I applaud the DOC-DCC partnership that has very successfully ended up in a balance around how we manage our freedom camping. I've seen the effects of the Community Ranger program through the eyes of a Community Ranger, and it's been an eye-opener to learn about the visitors that we get, that we have here, and I'll come back to that. But I believe that program has been pivotal. And I want to give a shout out to Mr. Hogg, because his knowledge and experience over an extended period has certainly helped Stephen. You've done an extraordinary job in managing that program. As to the bill, I am disappointed to learn that the fines are not connected to the rental car companies. That has been a long-held hope, and I think that would have been the final puzzle piece. I too have a concern about that requirement for the fixed toilet and what that's going to mean, and I've had feedback from local people who use camper vans to go on their holidays about that particular issue. In terms of our bylaw, I think we can be really proud of where that landed, and it has been very effective. As for the 2 nights, it was the bylaw was settled upon during a very busy time with very large numbers of visitors. And so maybe at the next review of the Freedom Camping bylaw, that's the time to have a look at that and see. And Councillor O'Malley's memory of, or perhaps it was, no, Mr. Hogg's memory of why 2 nights was settled on was actually accurate from my memory as well. And finally, I just want to finish on the need for us to be a welcoming city, which I believe we are. But there was a period through this Freedom Camping management evolving that we were teetering on not being a welcoming city. And I believe where we've arrived at does provide that. We know we have a range of visitors. It's young people who often come back to visit our city later in life because they've had a great experience here on their first visit, and I've met them when they've returned. There's families, retirees, overseas visitors, domestic visitors from other parts of New Zealand. There's people of all different occupations, including filmmakers, and that feeds into extending the knowledge about our city and promoting it when they get home. If they've had a good experience, they'll tell their friends and family about it. And I also want to give a shout out to the community boards, because I know they did an exceptional job over many years, from managing the issues in the first place to supporting and welcoming the visitors. And I always remember the manaakitanga of the community at Warrington and the associated community board, and extending really warm manaakitanga to the visitors who arrived there. So thank you for the work, staff, and we'll be interested to see where this bill lands.
Kia ora. Next is Councillor Walker, followed by Deputy Mayor Barker and Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing like a Freedom Camping paper to engender some in-depth conversations. I think we should pat ourselves in the back here. We have done well, and as the paper points out, I think in 2019-20, Freedom Camping was worth $3.7 million to our economy, and I think we are generally welcoming now. But I think we should also remember, as Mr. Hogg points out, that Freedom campers come in all shapes and sizes, and Councillor Gary, you have met somebody around this table who was once a Freedom camper. That's myself. I came here in '94 and travelled a lot around this country in a van and did not poop where I was not meant to poop. But you've got to remember also that Freedom Camping as a group contains a lot of New Zealanders who are not as financially comfortable as us around this table, and it makes up quite a large proportion. So that's why I asked my question around the legislation bill, the self-contained motor vehicle legislation bill, which I do now remember coming around here. We get a lot of bills that we have to read and submit on, and I guess I wish I'd paid more attention, because as that bill just passed its first reading recently, I see that as quite a punitive bill, actually, which I think effectively will allow wealthier people to use public land largely as they please, whereas poorer people engaging actually in exactly the same behaviour will get fined $1,000 simply because they can't afford a dedicated second vehicle to camp in. And don't get me wrong, bad behaviour, if it's bad behaviour, absolutely should be punished for all classes. But just camping your car on public land and doing nothing wrong should not be illegal in 21st century New Zealand, in my mind. And to be honest, the law change as I read it will largely be ineffective, because that small proportion of people who break the law are going to break the law, whether it's picking up your dog's poo or whatever it is. And I think, in essence, this will largely work against hard-working Kiwis who don't have the financial means to take themselves and their whānau out to experience wider New Zealand, while on the whole behaving in a way that we would expect from everyone. So I just want to put that out there, and I am quite surprised, and it's often pointed out that I was endorsed by Labour to sit in this seat, but yet again I will critique the Labour Party and the Greens who supported it in its first reading. I hope that when the second reading comes, that there are amendments to that particular bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Confession, I am the daughter of a freedom camper. My mother and father arrived here in 1967 as freedom campers around the South Island, and we can look at the value that my parents have brought as freedom campers to the city and just think about that. I want to just go back to the Tourism New Zealand statistics, and these are from 2018 from the International Visitor Survey, and it talks about the value of freedom campers to New Zealand. They do tend to stay longer and spend more and visit more regions. So 3.4% of international visitors have done some form of freedom camping in New Zealand, and mainly Germans, but also lots of Australians. So they spend about $99 a day. So it was interesting to see that $95 a day figure in Dunedin. So we probably need to think about how we get some more money out of that. I worked in the Economic Development Unit and Destination Management a long time ago, and worked around the 2011 Rugby World Cup, and we were putting the freedom camping rules into place. And this is why I absolutely support having national rules around it, because there's dozens of TLAs, and when the camper vans are going along, they don't know they're crossing a border and the rules are different, so it'd be great to get the national legislation sorted out. I did bring up the cost of enforcement because I was a little concerned that we were using a sledgehammer on a pin when it's just 3% of our visitors or so, and we're spending or investing over $208,000 on enforcement and education. And I do know from internally, one of the reasons that we were scoping down some of that enforcement was that the costs had increased hugely on that enforcement, and we do need to consider, when we've got a very high compliance rate, about whether we want to keep doing that. Also, I'm really concerned about the MB funding and whether that keeps on coming through, because it shouldn't just be a council carrying a cost of what is a national issue, I guess. I'd really love for us to be a motorhome friendly city. There's the Motor Caravan Association. I've got some statistics that I couldn't find very quickly, but they spend a huge amount of money. That's that sort of more silver market, I guess, campers that come through and spend a lot of money, and also a huge value to those small communities going into communities like Middlemarch, Otago Peninsula, etc., and supporting their cafes, their shops, etc. So there is a lot of value in these visitors that I support. So I support this. I don't support the motion, because I support the noting the freedom camping end of season report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I very well remember when we were putting down the submission on this bill. I gave a pretty fiery speech at the time, and cynically now I would say the Self-Contained Motor Vehicle Legislation Act could also be called the Stuart Nash is Easily Lobbied Act, because at the time what I said was, this looks like QLDC's camping policy, and it pretty much does. And I also said that he was pandering to the privileged and the elite. So thank you, Councillor Walker, for coming to that same conclusion now. We never went there because we finally went through the whole series of steps that you have to go through for a territorial authority to understand what the right approach was. Mr. Hogg said our early impressions of them were inaccurate. I think that was because, in fact, as a group, we were looking at them quite biasedly. We were finding the worst story we could find in the media and then slathering that across the whole of the group. It is also true that the third biggest freedom camping group in New Zealand is New Zealanders. So when you start restricting the behaviours of freedom campers, you are, by effect and extension, restricting the behaviours of New Zealanders. I don't think it's going to have too much impact, this bill. I know that we're sort of off to the bill as we go into this, because in fact it will end up resulting in more self-contained vehicles, but our issue really was never whether the vehicles were self-contained or contained, it was the sheer number hitting the city. And we took an approach which was really important. At the time that we were about to make that decision, through questions and answers, it became clear that we didn't even have enough commercial spaces in town to accommodate those people. So the only way that we could guarantee accommodation is to give the sites that we gave. The Waikato Coast Community Board and myself lobbied hard for the urban site, and it finally came, and it was good that it arrived. What we came to the conclusion was that the cost of providing those facilities and the light policing we could do was cheaper than the QLDC policing alone. I see the price rising now a little, so I think we need to look at that. And I think the answer to that is actually provisions of good sites ends up getting you compliance. So we can probably quite safely drop back on the policing and without negative consequence. So I am glad that we are doing that. I just want to remind us, I want us to always keep front and centre on this. We almost became highly restrictive. We came very close to it. We would have been in a state of high policing costs, very poor provision of services, and therefore lots of people breaking what was in front of them. And instead we went in the other direction. It came out cheaper and it gave us a better reputation around the country. So I don't want us to forget that as we go forward, because there's not many of us left who are in that original group. And frankly, I almost get PTSD every time I see freedom camping come up, because it was a rough time to be in the middle of that debate. I thank the staff for their report, and I really do think that cutting back on policing would be a really good approach to this. Thank you.
Yes, I see the council, the DCC approach to freedom camping as a win-win situation, and I think we see the results here in this report. And we've, by being a welcoming city and bringing the freedom campers into the city and making it easier for them, but simultaneously providing some light policing to ensure that they do comply with relatively simple and straightforward regulations, we've had a really good rate of compliance and a really good rate of visitorship. So I think that's a salutary lesson for us. And a very good achievement on behalf of the City Council, but in particular Scott and his team. And I'd very much like to see that continue. And the increase in the regulations that are coming forward hopefully won't make any difference to that. But we look forward to welcoming many more visitors to the city over the years to come.
Thank you. I have not always supported freedom camping around this table. Are you okay?
I'm all right.
And when I look back on some of the ODT headlines, I look at freedom camping overflows, freedom camping fights deepen, freedom camping petition filling. So there was definitely quite a challenge in the community over the last decade. And I think the key that we heard that very much loud and clear in the freedom camping bylaw process back in 2016, 2017. We had communities basically struggling with the impact of freedom camping. And we heard that loud and clear around this table many times through that period. But I think the key is the processes we went through, but also the evolution of freedom camping. And that's why I touched on the CamperMate app and things like that. The education process of most of the freedom campers that now come through our city is dramatically different to what we were dealing with in 2015, 2016, and even 2017. And I think that has also assisted us in basically getting to where we've got to and getting such a positive end of season report. There will still be days where we find people in vehicles that are not suited to freedom camping parked up side roads behind bushes doing what they're doing, even sleeping overnight and not adhering to the bylaws. There will always be a number that don't. But I think the key is we've got a community that actually is a lot more supportive, extremely more supportive on freedom camping. And we have less idiots driving freedom campers. And I think that's the important part. And I think that's what this report for me really shows, is that we have come a long way, and I think there is the benefits of freedom camping for the city. Thank you.
Kia ora, everyone. Councillor Benson Pope, do you wish to exercise your right of reply? Okay, thank you. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. I declare the motion is carried. And item 9, items of consideration by the Chair. Are there any? Thank you. I'm going to just sign off with a karakia whakamutuka, if I can get my code right. And this just talks about drawing on the energy, the universal energy, to enrich us all in all our elements. And yeah. And kia kaha to Councillor Vandervis for the next meeting. I'm sorry, and I'm an apology. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, kia te kakai, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatā, koia rai roko, whakairia ake ki ruka, kia tina, tina, huie, tai ki e. So I declare the meeting closed at 2:26 p.m. Kia ora, thank you. Thank you to the staff, especially Ms. Riddle. Thank you.
Thank you for all being here and ready for the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations meeting today of 9th May 2023. I'd very much like to welcome you all here and also to welcome staff in particular, Mr. Gavin Logie, our Chief Financial Officer, and Richard Davey, who I understand will be able to speak to us on the Waipori issue and hopefully give us some insights into international finance, which has been quite exciting these last couple of months. I'd like to start with the apologies. I have an apology from Councillor Laufiso. I don't see any other. I'm looking for a seconder and got one from Councillor Walker. So I move from the chair that we accept the apology of Councillor Laufiso. All in favour? Against? Abstains? Right, I declare that carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I would like to move from the chair that we accept or confirm the agenda, but with the following clarification, and that is if you look on page 40 of your agenda, there's a debt graph which is very small, and it's possible to misinterpret a dot before 3 zeros in the vertical axis for a comma. This has been a bit of an issue with some people that have looked at it. Just to confirm that the vertical x-axis on the page 40 graph is thousands of millions and not hundreds of thousands of millions. But that's just a small clarification. Otherwise, I'd like to move from the chair that the committee accepts the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconded, Councillor Lucas. All those in favour? Or any against? Carried. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. I hope not to put you all to sleep by saying that members are reminded of the need to stand aside from the decision making when a conflict of interest arises as their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interest they might have. Are there any changes or updates? Councillor Gary.
Just as per the last meeting, Chair of Study Dunedin.
Chair of Study to meeting. All right. I'd like to move from the chair, seconded by Councillor Lucas, that we confirm that we note the elected members' interest register with the change signalled by Councillor Gary. All those in favour? Against? Carried. I would also like to move that we confirm the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Seconded, Councillor Gary, Councillor Lucas. Any discussion? Anyone have anything to say? All in favour? Aye. Against? I declare that carried as well. Confirmation of minutes. If we look at the minutes of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee of the 23rd of March, I'd like to move from the chair, seconded by Councillor Lucas, that we confirm the minutes of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee meeting held on the 23rd of March. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to the motion? We're all quite happy with those minutes. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that carried. On to item 6, the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee Forward Work Programme. I'd like to invite Chief Executive Sandy Graham and/or Chief Financial Officer Gavin Logie to speak to the report.
Either of us are happy to take questions, councillors.
Right, who has questions? In that case, I'll start with one. The investment plan figured on page 21, development of the investment plan and its slight change to time frame. It's just simply been pushed on a month, is that the case?
We've received some further information that we wanted to incorporate into it to make it as up to date as possible, so that will be coming to June now.
Right, so we don't have any other questions from anybody. In that case, I'd like to move from the chair that that we note the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee Forward Work Programme as at May, seconded by Councillor Mayhem. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Moving on, 7, financial result. Does Mr. Logie or Chief Executive Graham have anything to say regarding item 7? There's some fairly weighty numbers in here.
Probably just the main point for the month is obviously the change in depreciation. So councillors will remember that we finalised the annual report recently, and as part of that, the valuation in relation to Three Waters was amended down. As a result of that, the corresponding depreciation has been adjusted. So you'll see the graph on page 27 probably highlights it the most. Is the net deficit line has got a little bit better. Other than that, everything else is cash flows tracking in line with budget. CapEx is again still tracking ahead of budget, albeit that maybe the difference between actual and budget has come down a little bit in terms of percentage.
Question from Councillor Lucas.
So just following up on that, so what's the projection for capital expenditure by year end? Will still be ahead of budget or closer to budget?
At this stage, we would anticipate to be slightly ahead of budget, yes. Bearing in mind that the budget does include a $6.6 million underspend line, which we put in June, so effectively that's not going to happen based on the current trajectory of what we're spending. But certainly, we finalised the April results this morning, and the percentage difference has dropped, yeah. But it would still be over 100.
No other questions from councillors. I have one, and that is regarding interest cost. We've had significant increases in debt, both DCC and DCC companies. We now have significant increases in interest rates as well. Can you, perhaps Mr. Logie, give us an indication of what kind of a weekly interest bill we will currently be paying?
The DCC or for the group? Because I can't comment on the group.
Oh, well, just DCC
it.
would be a good start. Thank you.
Well, it's $11.5 million for the 9 months. So the math will be about 1.3, 1.4 per month.
1.4 million per month.
Yep.
And interest costs, and that's mainly to overseas banks and investors, is it?
No, that's to Dunedin City Treasury. All our borrowing, other than a small loan that we have with Housing New Zealand, all our borrowing is through DCTL.
And they do their borrowing through?
They do a combination of private and LGFA funding. So the majority of the private would be local New Zealand domiciled institutions.
Okay, all good. Well, thank you very much for that. No other questions? Councillor O'Malley.
Doesn't relate to the report so much as it's just a thing to think about. If the Three Water entities form, there's a thought that they might be able to have access to LGFA funding. Is that on the books?
Yeah, I couldn't comment on where the entity companies are going to get their funding from.
If they were, though, and then because we're a member of LGFA, then we would be exposed to the liabilities through the LGFA agreement?
I just don't think we can speculate on that because any agreement with those entities may be done on a different basis.
And I acknowledge it's way away from the item.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question around increased revenue, and I couldn't see that there was increased revenue from Toitu, Eyesight, Art Gallery, etc., just specifically said in there. So because the tourism numbers have grown and that would lead to more visitors coming through, I'm just wondering whether that's just, whether it's too small to mention, or whether or exceedingly well budgeted, or whether it has actually contributed to the DCC coffers.
In terms of the commentary, it's probably a small number, but certainly if you go to page 32, you can see the increased revenue, for example, for galleries, libraries and museums coming through. But obviously the corresponding impact is also this, a lot of time there is additional costs, particularly if they're on selling goods that they've purchased.
No other questions for anyone else? I've got one here, a couple actually. If we go to page 24 and we look at paragraph 8, it talks about the significant decrease in the depreciable replacement cost of our Three Waters from 2.4 billion down to 1.6 billion. And yet, if you look at 7 immediately above, it says depreciation expenditure was higher than expected following the asset revaluations, and that related to Three Waters and transport. Could you expand on how the lowering in the value or the valuation of the Three Waters asset, how that has affected depreciation?
So councillors will recall that when we did the annual report, the initial valuation that was done for the annual report, so that's the valuation as at 30th of June, was circa $2.4 billion. Following an audit process and review of that valuation, it was dropped to 1.6. The valuation prior to that, so the valuation for as at 30th of June prior to the valuation, was actually $1 billion. So the value has still gone up. It's just not as much as what we originally indicated.
Great, thank you very much. That I was struggling with the whole issue of depreciation, but that explains it very nicely for me. Thank you for that. A very nice and a very clear report, if not some very heavy numbers in it. If nobody has any further questions, I'd like to move from the chair that we note the finance and council controlled organisations. We note the financial performance for the period ended 31st March 2023 and the financial positions at that date. Seconded Councillor Lucas. All those in favour? All those against? None. I declare the motion carried. Getting on to the Waipori Fund now and asking Mr. Richard Davey if he'll come and speak to us. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Davey. Thank you very much again for your very clear report on Waipori. And just from the chair, hopefully, as well as giving us direct information on Waipori, I was hoping that you might also treat us with perhaps a little bit of insight into the international situation, especially since there's been 3 major banks go belly up in the last few months. Looking forward to anything that you might be able to enlighten us on.
Yes, those banks collapsing has been unfortunate. I suppose just one obvious question is, New Zealand banks remain very well capitalised and very sound and very strong, despite those banks having difficulty overseas. It does also kind of create an environment where there's less upward pressure on interest rates globally because of the effect of that and the effect on global growth.
Thank you for that. There is a reasonable amount, as I understand it, of the investment of Waipori Fund in overseas institutions. Are they performing less well as a result of the turmoil? Is the policy going to stay the same in terms of the balance that we have of local and overseas investment?
Yeah, those offshore investments have continued to perform very well. The fund's very well diversified and conservatively managed, and there's no direct investment in those specific bank stocks. And the strategy is to continue with the current mix of investments in the portfolio and the same asset allocation going forward.
Thank you. Are there any questions of this report? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Davey, again for a clear report as ever. 2 questions. One just stems from the previous question. In terms of equities, internationally, isn't it right to I guess draw the conclusion, even although the collapse of 3 banks might weigh slightly on the markets, it wouldn't have an effect on a well-chosen, well-researched business that is unrelated?
Yeah, I think that's right. I suppose it does affect the market overall and sentiment, but in the long run, the earnings of a company and the earnings outlook will be the main determinator of the stock price.
And as I've asked before, the benefits of a slightly weaker market just give the fund the opportunity to sort of engage in things like dollar cost averaging, for example.
Yeah, we review the portfolio on a monthly basis and look at the equities on a monthly basis and get advice on those equities. And also, a weaker market overall does tend to weaken the New Zealand dollar, which does tend to absorb the impact on the fund. Yeah.
And final question, and feel free not to answer this, it might be too difficult. In terms of that 17% spread we have in international equities, have you got any sense of geographically where the majority of that sits, or just the top 2 or 3?
Yeah, the majority is, we've obviously got Australian equities, which are a different category, but in the international component, it's largely made up of stocks in pound sterling, euro and US dollars. In terms of the proportion of each of those, I'd have to go back and check that, but largely those 3 currencies.
Thank you. I'm glad you didn't say the Indonesian rupee. Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendation when we get to that point.
I'm in the habit of moving them from the chair, but thank you for the offer. If there are no further questions, I'd like to move from the chair that the committee notes the Dunedin City Holdings Limited Limited Group quarterly update for the period ended 31st December 2022. Oh, thank you for that. So 31st of March, that rounds out the year then. Okay, so for the 31st of March, seconded Councillor Walker. Anyone want to have any discussion? Anyone wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I will briefly, thank you. There he goes again, briefly. I mean, and thank you, Mr. Davey, as we all should be aware now, we should all be on top of what the Waipori Fund is and acknowledge that it has a good geographical local spread in equity, short-term fixed interest deposits, bonds, property, etc. And be aware, of course, that the fund's objective is the longer term. And I don't think we should ever overlook that. And I think the balanced income, equities, collective we have that you can see in the pie chart follows sort of good practice internationally. And I think it's a relatively low risk investment vehicle in these uncertain times. And in terms of equities, I think it's worth remembering that although if you read the news now and you hear about the woes of the stock market and look how badly your personal investments are doing, all empirical evidence over the last 50 years shows that the returns on equities is the best return you'll get. And I think over those 50 years, if you take just Australian, New Zealand and American shares, the average yearly return is actually 9%. And I think I think at 4 out of every 5 years there'd be an increase on your equity holding. So I don't think it's time for us in any way to panic. Particularly in the context of the Waipuris, as I said, the risk elements. We should take absolute comfort in the longer term and keep firm and hold the course. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'd like to add really a similar sentiment, drawing attention to the graph at the bottom of page 45. If you look at the blue line, which is what Waipori has been doing, and you look at how that has performed relative to the official cash rate, the CPI, and then both since 2014, we have been well on the winning side of it for an extended period of time, despite some significant changes in the world economics. So congratulations to Mr. Davey and the team. And thank you very much for the money. Moving on now to item 9, feedback for draft statements of intent. Oops, thank you for putting that out. I forgot to put to the vote that we note the Dunedin City Holdings Limited quarterly update report for the period ended 31st of March for the Waipori Fund. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. I declare that carried. Now 9, feedback for draft statements of intent 2023-24. It's on page 47 of your agenda. I'd like to invite Ms. Bodecker, Manager of Governance, to speak to the report. Oh, and the Chief Executive, if you could.
And if I could, councillors, you'll see we've attempted to collate the feedback we received from councillors in attachment A, which is pages 51 and following on the agenda, and then provide some staff comment that's as a result of Sharon and I having discussions with DCHL about some of your feedback. Then in the body of the report, in paragraph 7, there are some suggested all-encompassing items that you might want to consider to frame as resolutions for inclusion in an updated DCHL draft statements of intent. But this is entirely for you. Our advice is that the focus should be on instructing DCHL to make the changes you want at a company level, because some of the changes you were seeking were at a level below where you probably should be focusing at the DCH level in the first instance to achieve the outcomes you want at a company level.
Thank you. Ms. Bodecker, you have anything to add at this point? Questions? Councillor Barker.
I was quite concerned to see this paper because I did spend hours on going through and looking at it, and I was really, really concerned, especially around the Dunedin International Airport and the Dunedin Venues Management, who had taken out a lot of KPIs that we spent a lot of years. So I just wonder why we've got staff comment in DVML who are deciding that they don't want to put those measures that they took out back in.
So it's comment from DCHL about looking at that. So report, and you have directors of your companies who are managing them and through DCHL, a holdings company. And so if you want DCHL to instruct their companies to put them back in, then you can do that. But they can. That's the mechanism rather than instructing directly.
So what is the point of this process if we, in the past, we have gone through these and added in measurements that we thought that we wanted and we have had them put in? So is this a blockage to having those changes? I mean, I'm very concerned about taking out minimum 80% satisfaction rating through surveys of events, because it's about some satisfaction on Dunedin venues, because it's a community asset. So how do we make sure that they are delivering a great experience to our visitors, people?
I think if the concerns are with the measures, the right place to do that is through the letter of expectation early on. But the companies have assessed these and made some decisions about how they think they can manage their performance. And so there's a trade-off between how this sits with DCHL and the companies. I don't think there's a blockage, but the process, and Sharon will correct me, if we give this finalised feedback, can DCHL say no?
They can. They would update the statement of intent that would then come to the next council meeting for approval. One comment that had come through from DCHL on a lot of these measures that they have removed was that audit found them not necessarily measurable. There was insufficient data to always measure some of the KPIs that were there, and the encouragement was very much to focus on performance rather than compliance, and to narrow them down to have more focus.
I just wonder then if some of them are being consolidated into statements rather than performance measures. Some of them were like achieve X number of passengers, and I just wonder, you can count passengers, so how is that not an audit? I just want to ask a question. Is the audit their audit committee, or is it Audit New Zealand? Because is Audit New Zealand, because we had one non-compliance from them during their annual reports, which was around the stadium, but we haven't seen an audit report that would give this feedback to them.
What we have incorporated in that comment on page 52 is the feedback we received from DCHL after discussion with them. So we simply put the feedback that we have had from them.
So would it be possible for us to send them attachment A as our official feedback rather than the 3 statements that have been pulled out?
Attachment A with the staff comment?
I'm just really confused about whether it's DCHL comment or staff comment. So is this is the staff comment the DCC feedback from DCHL?
The staff comment is based on feedback we received from DCHL.
So then would it be possible to submit attachment A without the staff comment on it?
We could attach that to our letter.
I suspect at a process level you would then have some challenges based on the comments back from DCHL, especially when they're saying that what is being asked will cause them problems potentially with audit. And with the airport, for example, we're a 50% shareholder, or 49, whichever it is, and the Crown is the other partner. And the comment there is that the Crown and audit were comfortable with the changes that have been made. For example, so I think it's challenging to put all of those comments to them, and that I wonder that a way forward might be that we reach agreement around something today, but then we have an earlier approach to how we build our letter of expectation, and if KPIs are a focus.
Yeah, the letter of expectation is very, very general, so I understand that. And as I understood the process of us going into the feedback for statements of intent was to set those KPIs for our companies. And I just wonder, I can't ask you if it's pointless, but yeah, sorry, I don't know how to phrase that question.
Can I suggest, Deputy Mayor Barker, that perhaps what might be helpful is if we could get a councillor agreed set of feedback that may then be able to be forwarded. Would that be a way forward perhaps? Or is it a bit late for that in the process now?
The staff have suggested some things at a high level that in the body of the report that they think encompass at a high level the intention of the specific feedback that elected members have made, bar 1 or 2 which are council policy positions that we haven't offered a view on. The timing is tricky. This process generally is a really tricky one with timing. And there's that arm's length relationship still that we have to manage that through the holdings company. So the staff have suggested that the feedback is focused at the holding company level with a direction to them to try and give effect to some of what you're asking by way of consistent reporting across the companies, for example.
Councillor Lucas, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I do have a question, but first of all, in response to something Ms Graham said, that you said in our letter of intent, but we weren't aware at that time that a lot of these KPIs were going to be taken out. Is that
my understanding is that we weren't aware.
And following on from that, I mean, if you look at the DVML comment, and they're saying focused KPIs geared to performance rather than compliance. Well, surely things like add back, we've asked to add back, achieve an 80% retention rate of commercial partners renewals by contract value. That to me is very much about performance, and that would be a very easily measured one, along with, as the one that Deputy Mayor Barker talked about, the satisfaction with the major events and things like that, and visitors from outside of the city. I mean, that's something that those three I would have thought we were very concerned about, and that's very much in relation to performance. I disagree with the staff comment on that.
Well, the staff comment is summarising the feedback we've had from DVML and why they got to that point. It's entirely at your hands. You can make whatever changes you want through this process and forward it to the companies, and then it will be for them to determine what changes they make in the final statements that get submitted to you for approval in June.
I understand. I mean, the airport company did have a lot of very detailed performance measures, but now they've kind of taken everything out. And I do understand about agreeing with the Crown, but they do seem to have gone from way over here and swung the pendulum the other way. And they've got, we've said, that they've changed from 48 to 29 measures. It does make it very hard to look at some of the performance that they've taken out. I mean, a lot of those performance measures have disappeared.
Right, I think that point has been made. Councillor Gilbert, you had something to add, or questions at least to ask at this point?
Very much along the same sorts of lines, but I'll try and make it varied. The one comment was made that the Crown and Audit are comfortable with the changes made. Out of curiosity, are the Crown and Audit governors of the city?
The Crown is a 50% owner of the airport, which is the company that comment relates to.
We, however, are clearly not comfortable, and the assertion that some of the things on here are not measurable is laughable. I'm trying to be as polite as I can, but to include sustainability
Excuse
goals.
me, Councillor Gilbert, could you just be a little bit more polite? I know it's coming from me, but hey.
I guess I have no question other than, no, I don't have a question, I'm just not happy.
You'll have the opportunity to speak to the motion after I've put it. Does anyone else have a question? Councillor O'Malley.
I'm wondering, are we seeing the frustration that shareholders often have when they are operating, operating under the Companies Act, and you've got to reach past your board to the day-to-day behaviour? I mean, in many respects, as a shareholder, owner, but these are under boards, is that why you're suggesting that this has really got to go back to DCHL because it's got the role of the holding company?
Look, that's why we've gotten to where we have as staff advice. If councillors think this is laughable, we don't. This has been a difficult process with the number of the detail that the council has gone into because of the changes that the company's made. But this is the process we're left with, and directors still have director responsibilities, and that's the point I think you're making, councillor. There's that arm's length relationship, and I think the way through this is to be clearer with DCHL about your expectations as shareholder to them, who then manage these companies. And many of you have done that directors training. The directors of their companies have to be the ones who are comfortable with the performance requirements of those companies if they're to meet their director obligations. So that's, I think, goes to that point. If I suggest that we could review how we do this, because it was last minute. There was the engagement we got with councillors was late as well. Just that was the nature of how we found it, and the feedback we pulled together as quickly as we could in the time that we had. And so all of us, I think we could look at how we did this process differently next time.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Gary.
This one's for the Chief. Chief, just pulling out the audit comments, I mean, what would be the impact of going against what audit recommends?
The companies can put whatever they like in, and it is for audit to audit them.
I think the answer is we can't speak for what the audit consequence would be. It would depend on the view of the auditor at the time of the audit.
Right. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Is this a matter of us perhaps, when we've looked at the statement of intent, putting feedback and, suggestions to the companies that maybe when they've looked at it, they've said they aren't able to meet or make those changes. They're not workable for them. So is that the situation?
I don't think so. I think what's happened is the draft statements of intent that we received had changes, like the Deputy Mayor has highlighted, that were different than we thought, than we had anticipated, including the consolidation of a range of KPIs, for example, in two of the companies. one of them's trickier because you're not the only shareholder, and the other one is the stadium. So I think that would, and so our process is always being refined in this. And I wonder, again, Councillor Barker, I think, said our letter of expectation is quite high-level engineering. Maybe it needs to be more specific.
Is there an issue when we have an initial letter of intent or statement of intent, and then with a review it comes back quite different? Is that, you know, when we get it, but they're changing all the time, so is there any issue with that? Like, that's what I'm just wondering, if it's quite different to what we originally signed.
But it's not. So this is a new one that hasn't been adopted yet.
Right. So that's fine to me. For the next new one, every time they change it, if it's changed quite a bit from the first one we signed, there's no problem with that. I'm just seeing that we're not overly happy with it, and it's quite different. So, yeah.
There's a difference between the letter of expectation, the expectations we set, and then the statements of the draft statements of intent. But we do the letter of expectation in December, the draft statements of intent about February, or by the end of February, and then feedback to the companies by the start of May. And the timing is tight, especially with the number of changes that the companies have made in the statements of intent this time. And so, and I don't know how they relate to what you said in the letter of expectation. We didn't have time to do that analysis, and I'm not sure that if any of you have looked at this either.
Okay, I've got a question as well, and that is regarding Aurora. Prior to the Aurora Delta split, they were, both Delta and Aurora were subject to the Local Government Information Responses Act in terms of responses to information requests. Since the split, because Aurora are now a lines company, they are no longer legally subject to the Local Government Information Act requests. But I'm wondering whether we could ask Aurora that they actually agree to treat all information requests as Le Gourmet requests, even though they're not legally obliged to.
They already do that?
Is it written anywhere? Because I've had some personal trouble getting that. Perhaps that's something we could look into later.
But the Aurora operate as if they were covered by Le Gourmet.
Okay, great. That's fine. In speaking to this motion, we don't have a motion yet. All right. In that case, from the chair, I will move. Oh, you've got another question. Mayor Braddock.
I'm just, for Dunedin International Airport and also Dunedin Venues Management, there is guidance from the elected member feedback. So in point number 17, 18 and 19 ask for business development goals, commercial goals and objectives, essentially commercial objectives. But the staff comment reinforces that with comment from audit, which encouraged more focused KPIs geared to performance. And similarly, in Dunedin Venues DVML, audit also encouraged more focused KPIs geared to performance. Yet councillors have asked for that, but the staff comment is there should be no change. It seems like a contradiction to me. Is that the case, or have I got that wrong?
I don't think it's a contradiction, and what I don't have in front of me, and apologies, are the current statements of intent and what they changed in the KPIs for the airport and for DVML. Because what the note says is that they have consolidated the KPIs. So I wonder that what has happened, and sorry I haven't done that analysis, is that they've taken some of the things in 16, 17, 18 and 19 and reframed them in different KPIs in the revised statements of intent.
So would it be more appropriate that we leave this on the table and go back and review that as councillors, or we have to make a decision on this?
No, we have to make a decision on this today.
It seems like a shortage of information, really, to be able to do that. When to me, it seems like councillors and audit are aligned on improving, calling for KPIs geared to performance, yet there is a rejection of that.
I don't think that's what that comment says. And if you want to take a short adjournment, we can, Mr. Chair, we can find the draft statements and just compare how, if and where those particular things have been incorporated.
Right. From the chair, I just want to gauge the comfort of the meeting. The motion that I proposed to put was that we note the feedback received and staff comments on the draft statements of intent. If people are happy to note that, we could go down that track, or we could take an adjournment and see if we get an alternative motion. All right, excuse me. Just a moment, I'll confer with the Chief Executive.
Resolutions on these things, that you resolve that they include this and this. Okay. Yeah, that should be what was there.
In that case, I move that we take an adjournment to nail down exactly what we want as an emotion here, seconded by Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Against? We'll recommence in 5 minutes. Would that be long enough? motion in front of you all, and hopefully the motion that's up there now is something that, first of all, I'd like to inquire if anybody wants any further changes to the motion, given that it has been changed. Time to read the motion. It does bear taking a bit of time over because these are quite important and weighty considerations. Yes, Councillor Walker.
So is this motion separate to the stuff in here that's also been agreed to, or do we have to include that in this motion? I'm thinking of number 3 and 4, which was the inclusion of the carbon emissions and waste reduction strategy stuff, which is not up there.
Where is that?
And 3 and 4 in the feedback columns, that's 2 I asked for.
So all the feedback is included as in D, bar comment 1, but only things A, B and C are being required, the others are for consideration. So if you want more things to be required, then something else will need to be added.
So we're requiring A, B and C, and then asking them to consider D. Councillor Gary.
I was just looking at 2, which in fact is in the motion, so isn't that a duplication? 2, about the people and culture strategy, etc. So it's A in the motion, but it's actually number 2 in the feedback. So is there any point in?
So there are 3 things that council at a consolidated level with A, B and C are going to direct happen. And then rather than go through and edit that table, the rest they can consider. So we could consider the remaining elected member feedback.
I understand that, but that one is already covered in there. Wouldn't you delete that out of there?
I understand what you're saying. What I am suggesting is that in D, you go attach the remaining elected member feedback and we will go and edit it. Because otherwise... No, I'm just suggesting they add that in now.
Not that a bit of duplication would necessarily be a problem anyway. But Councillor Walker again, yes?
Sorry to labour the point. So I'm being assured here that as in part D is the inclusion of the feedback tables that we're looking at. So number 3 and 4 are safe. The agreement will still be there because they've already agreed to it. I know it's a dumb question, but I'm just, because we're getting a little bit, I'm getting confused, but I'm assured that that's going nowhere. It remains as.
Based on the comment the discussion and the commitment that DCHL have given us in that document.
Right. I think we're ready now to move, and I will move from the chair, that the committee instruct DCHL to make the following changes at a company level. A, people and culture diversity, equity and engagement strategies are put in place for all companies by the 30th of June 2024. B, all companies to report on emissions over time against baseline data by 30 June 2024. C, that DCHL develop a consistent approach to benchmark reporting across all companies. D, attach the remaining elected member feedback minus comment 1 for DCHL to consider if it wishes to make any further changes. Right, seconded Councillor Lucas. Open for questions. Discussion. Deputy Mayor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm unhappy, but happy that we have resolved something today. I spent hours going through all of the statements of intent and the KPIs, hours and hours on all of this work, and I've been pretty hot on trying to manage our CCOs and those expectations and those measurements. There's $1.7 billion worth of assets, of our assets, the Dunedin City Council as owners, even though we're only 50% owners of the airport. And I was extremely disappointed to see some of those really key measurements taken out, like numbers through the airport, the satisfaction and retention ratings for especially Dunedin venues, because Dunedin venues is actually a community asset. It's the stadium, it's the town hall, and we really need to make sure that our community, the event attenders, the people that have bought seats or boxes are happy, and that's one of those key measurements, is the custom measurements. And the directors are responsible to the owners, which is us, so we need to be really clear about this process and clear about our expectations. We all care about getting money back from our investment in Dunedin City Holdings, but we also care about those other four well-beings which we're trying to embed, which is as well as the economic, and that includes the economic impact. When we talk about the stadium, we're talking about those events, the economic impact they bring in, the environmental impact, which we have been hot on the carbon emissions, waste reduction especially. So there was waste reduction measures taken out of one of them, which I was really disappointed in, and then let's have a strategy. And we have no visibility on what those strategies and what those targets look like. So that's why in some of my feedback I asked for them to be published on the website, because we don't see them. The cultural, of course, and the social come through owning things like, again, the town hall, etc. The airport consolidated from 48 to 29 measures, and I just made in my notes, sorry, it's not opening for me right now. Let's see if that opens it. They had said that they've changed the KPIs due to shareholder feedback, and I was completely unaware that we as council had made any feedback to them. So it went from 48 to 29 measures, and they were consolidated into statements like achieve X or implement Y, and have taken out all the clear measurements. And previously, like waste, it was a clear measurement of diversion of waste from landfill. So that's why I asked for those to be put back in. And then there was things like about the farm, implement recommendations from the Frontier Sustainable Farm Environment Plan and specific initiatives from the sustainability strategy. I mean, it's not just an airport, it is a farm as well, so we need to make sure that that's running properly. The business development, achieve X number of passengers. We absolutely want them to be focused on getting those passengers back through the airport, because it is huge for us. And I think I've talked about the questions around achieve minimum 80% satisfaction rating for DVML, and then add back under increased economic benefit goals 60% of attendees of all major events, more than 10,000 packs to come from outside Dunedin City. So this goes back to the economic impact. So I was very, very, very concerned to see that those measures were loosening up, because we want to achieve a number of things from our CCOs. So I'm pleased that we are able to give a full feedback back to Dunedin City Holdings through this process. However, I'm very concerned to read the comments that we got in the appendix today, because they made me quite angry. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? In that case, I'll take the opportunity to confirm Councillor Barker's, Deputy Barker's concern about getting passengers through the airport. I think that is something that we do really need to keep a good eye on. We need to make sure that that's where their focus is. Having said that, if we look at the $1 billion plus assets that we have in our companies, the big three, which you could argue there was just a big two, Aurora, City Forests, and then Delta. And those three companies are really the key to getting a dividend stream. They are the key to a lot of employment around the city. And the other companies have had a tendency to complicate issues in terms of KPIs, feedback, whatever. So I'm happy with this particular motion, because it doesn't shy away from essentially Aurora, City Forest and Delta having to look at getting us real commercial dividends in the future. and I warmly recommend that you all vote for it. Perhaps we could have a vote by division, since there has been a bit of concern regarding this. Lauren, if you could. Sorry, you want to borrow which? Oh, sorry.
Councillor Ackland? Not here. Absent. Beg your pardon. Councillor Barker?
Aye.
Councillor Benson-Pope's not here. Councillor Gary?
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert?
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan? Aye. Councillor Lucas?
Aye.
Councillor Mahan?
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley?
Aye.
Mayor Raddick?
Aye.
Councillor Walker? Aye. Councillor Wetherell?
Aye.
Councillor Wiley?
Yes.
Councillor Van der Vis?
Yes. And I declare the motion to be unanimously carried.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
So that's unanimously carried. Unanimously carried. And that brings us pretty much to the end of the meeting, unless there are any items for consideration for the chair. Is there anything that anyone here would like me to chase up? Okay, given that there are none, I'd like to declare the meeting closed at 3:36, and thank you all for your attendance and for your focus. Thank you.